Okay, so we have a few more poems from the Book of Virtues. I took off the cover, but you can see the spine. The Book of Virtues, oh, there we go, by William J. Bennett. And we are in the first segment still, self-discipline. And I'm just going to pick up right where we left off. Okay, this is Ozymandias. I really hope I'm saying that right, because I'm going to be saying it over and over again. Percy by Shelley. Ozymandias is the Greek name for the Egyptian king Ramses II, who ruled about 1290 to 1223 BC and carried out, or took credit for, many great construction projects. The colossal stone head of a statue of Ramses lies on the ground at his mortuary temple in western Thebes, and the ancient Greek historian Diodorus Siculus described a funeral temple bearing an inscription much like the lines in Shelley's poem. Remembering Ozymandias is a great way to control our vanity, especially as we climb the ladder of success. It makes a striking contrast with the story of King Canute. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions red, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Can't take it with you, can you? Phaeton. Pretty sure that's how you say it. Phaeton. Adopted from Thomas Bulfinch. The feeling of youth, Joseph Conrad said, is a feeling of being able to, quote, last forever, outlast the sea, the earth, and all men, end of quote. Somehow, as we all know from having been there, youth cannot recognize the illusion of invincibility. Here is one of Ovid's grandest stories. It tells of the rashness of youth and reminds us of the need for the governing prudence of parents. Phaeton was the son of Phoebus Apollo and the nymph Clymene. One day a schoolfellow laughed at the idea of his being the offspring of a god, and Phaeton went in rage and shame to his mother. "If I am indeed of heavenly birth," he said, "give me some proof of it." "Go and ask your father yourself," Clymene replied. "It will not be hard. The land of the sun lies next to ours." Full of hope and pride, Phaeton traveled to the regions of the sunrise. The palace of the sun stood reared on lofty columns, glittering with gold and precious stones, while polished ivory formed the ceilings and silver the doors. Upon the walls, Vulcan had represented earth, sea, and skies with their inhabitants. In the sea were the nymphs, some sporting in the waves, some riding on the backs of fishes, while others sat upon the rocks and dried their sea-green hair. The earth had its towns and forests and rivers and rustic divinities. Over all was carved the likeness of the glorious heaven, and on the silver doors were the 12 signs of the zodiac, 6 on each side. Clymene's son climbed the steep ascent and entered the halls of his father. He approached the chamber of the sun, but stopped at a distance, for the light was more than he could bear. Phoebus, arrayed in purple vesture, sat on a throne which glittered as with diamonds. On his right hand and his left stood the day, the month, and the year, and at regular intervals the hours. Spring stood with her head crowned with flowers. Summer stood with garment cast aside and garland formed of spears of ripped grain. And there too were autumn, her feet stained with grape juice, and icy winter, his hair stiffened with hoarfrost. Surrounded by these attendants, the sun, with the eye that sees everything, beheld the youth dazzle with the novelty and splendor of the scene. "What is the purpose of your errand?" he asked. "O light of the boundless world," the youth replied, "I beseech you, give me some proof that I am indeed your son." He ceased, and his father, laying aside the beams that shone all around his head, bade him approach. "You are my son," he said, embracing him. "What your mother has told you is true. To put an end to your doubts, ask what you will, and the gift shall be yours. I call to witness the dreadful river Styx, which we gods swear by in our most solemn engagements." Many times Phaeton had watched the sun riding across the sky, and he had dreamed of what it would be like to drive his father's chariot, urging the winged horses along their heavenly course. Now he realized that his dream could come true. "I want to take your place for a day, father," he cried at once, "just for one day. I want to drive your chariot across the sky and bring light to the world." Instantly the son realized the foolishness of his promise, and he shook his radiant head in warning. "I have spoken rashly," he said. "This is the only request I would deny, and I beg you to withdraw it. You ask for something not suited to your youth and strength, my son. Your lot is mortal, and you ask what is beyond a mortal's power. In your ignorance, you aspire to do what even the other gods themselves may not do. None but myself may drive the flaming car of day. Not even Jupiter, whose terrible right arm hurls the thunderbolts, would try it. The first part of the way is steep, the sun continued, so steep that even when the horses are fresh in the morning, they can hardly make the climb. The middle part of the journey takes me high up in the heavens, and I can scarcely look down without alarm, and behold the earth and sea stretched beneath me. The last part of the road descends rapidly, and requires the most careful driving. Tethys, the ocean's wife who is waiting to receive me, often trembles for me, lest I should fall in headlong. Add to all this, the heaven is all the time turning round, and carrying the stars with it. I have to be perpetually on my guard, lest that movement which sweeps everything else along should also hurry me away. Suppose I should lend you the chariot, what would you do? Could you keep your course while the sphere was revolving under you? Perhaps you think there are forests and cities, the abodes of gods and palaces and temples along the way. On the contrary, the road runs right through the most frightening monsters. You pass by the horns of the bull, in front of the archer, or near the lion's jaws, and where the scorpion stretches its arm in one direction and the crab in another. Nor will you find it easy to guide those horses who snort fire from their mouths and nostrils. I can scarcely govern them myself when they resist the reins. Beware, my son, lest I be the donor of a fatal gift. Recall your request while yet you may. Do you want proof that you are sprung from my blood? I give you proof in my fears for you. Look at my face. I would that you could look into my heart, and there you would see a father's cares. Look about you and ask for anything from all the riches of the earth or sea. Ask and you shall have it. But I beg you not to ask this one thing. It is destruction, not honor, you seek. You shall have it if you persist. I swear the oath and it must be kept, but I beg you to choose more wisely. He ended, but his warning did no good, and Phaeton held to his demand. So having resisted as long as he could, Phoebus at last led the way to where the lofty chariot stood. Its wheels were made of gold, its spokes of silver. Along the yoke, every kind of jewel reflected the brightness of the sun. While the boy gazed in admiration, the early dawn threw open the purple doors of the east and showed the pathway, strewn with roses. Phoebus, when he saw the earth beginning to glow and the moon preparing to retire, ordered the hours to harness the horses. They obeyed, and led the steeds from the lofty stalls, well fed with rich ambrosia. Then the sun rubbed his son's face with the magic lotion, which made him able to endure the brightness of the flame. He placed his crown of rays on his head and sighed. If you insist on doing this, he said, at least take my advice. Spare the whip and hold the reins tight. The steeds need no urging, but you must labor to hold them back. Do not take the straight road through the 5 circles of heaven, but turn off to the left. Avoid the northern and southern zones, but keep within the limits of the middle ones. You'll see the mark of the wheels, and they'll guide you. The sky and the earth both need their due share of heat, so do not get too high, or you'll burn the heavenly dwellings, nor too low, or you'll set the earth on fire. The middle course is the safest and the best. Now I leave you to fortune, who I hope will plan better for you than you have for yourself. Night is passing out of the western gates, and we can delay it no longer. Take the reins, or better yet, take my counsel and let me bring light to the world while you stay here and watch in safety. But even as he was speaking, the boy sprang into the chariot, stood erect, and grasped the reins with delight, pouring out thanks to his reluctant parent. The horses filled the air with their fiery snortings and stamped the ground impatiently. The barriers were let down, and suddenly the boundless plain of the universe lay open before them. They darted forward and sliced through the clouds into the winds from the east. It wasn't long before the steeds sensed that the load they drew was lighter than usual. As a ship without ballast careens and rolls off course on the sea, so the chariot was dashed about as if empty. The horses rushed headlong and left the traveled road. Phaeton began to panic. He had no idea which way to turn the reins, and even if he knew, he hadn't the strength. And for the first time, the big bear and the little bear were scorched with heat, and it would have plunged into the water if possible. The serpent, which lies coiled around the pole, torpid and harmless in the chill of the heavens, grew hot and writhed in angry fury. When the unhappy Phaeton looked down upon the earth, now spreading in the vast expanse before him, he grew pale, and his knees shook with terror. In spite of the glare all around him, the sight of his eyes grew dim. He wished he had never touched his father's horses. He was borne along like a vessel, driven before a storm, and the pilot can do no more than pray. Much of the heavenly road was behind him, but so much more lay ahead. He found himself stunned and dazed, and didn't know whether to hold the reins or to drop them. He forgot the names of the horses. He was horrified at the sight of the monstrous form scattered across the heaven. The scorpion, for instance, reached forward with its 2 great claws, while its poisonous stinger stretched behind. Phaeton's courage failed, and the reins fell from his hands. The horses, when they felt the reins loose on their backs, dashed headlong into the unknown regions of the sky. They raced among the stars, hurling the chariots over pathless places, now up in the high heaven, or now down to the earth. The moon saw with astonishment her brother's chariot running beneath her own. The clouds began to smoke, and the mountain tops caught fire. Fields grew parched with heat, plants withered, and harvests went up in flames. Cities perished with their walls and towers, and whole nations turned to ashes. Phaeton beheld the world on fire and felt the intolerable heat. The air was like the blast of a furnace, full of soot and sparks. The chariot glowed white-hot and veered one way, then another. Forests turned to deserts, rivers ran dry, and the earth cracked open. The sea shrank. Does this sound like the first time you drove a car? The sea shrank and threatened to become a dry plain. 3 times Neptune tried to raise his head above the surface, and 3 times he was driven back by the fiery heat. Then Earth, amid the smoking waters, screened her face with her hand, looked up to heaven, and in a trembling voice called on Jupiter. "O ruler of the gods," she cried, "if I have deserved this treatment, and it is your will that I perish with fire, why withhold your thunderbolts? Let me at least fall by your hand. Is this a reward of my fertility? Is it for this that I have given fodder for cattle, and fruit for men, and incense for your altars? What has my brother Ocean done to deserve such a fate? And look at your own skies. The very poles are smoking, as if they topple. Oh, and if they topple, your palace will fall. If sea, earth, and heaven perish, we fall into ancient chaos. Save what remains from the devouring flame. Take thought and deliver us from this awful moment." And overcome with heat and thirst, Earth could say no more. But Jupiter heard her, and he saw that all things would perish if he did not help quickly. He climbed the highest tower of heaven, where often he had spread clouds over the world, and hurled his mighty thunder. He brandished a lightning bolt in his hand and flung it at the charioteer. At once the car exploded. The mad horses broke the reins, the wheels shattered, and the wreckage scattered across the stars. And Phaeton, his hair on fire, fell like a shooting star. He was dead long before he left the sky. The river god received him and cooled his burning frame. Wow. I didn't see where that was going till the very end. I mean, I knew he'd get stopped, but I didn't know that was the fable behind shooting stars. And also a good one at that. Sometimes we get a little too big for our britches and don't quite listen to reason. That was an interesting one. Okay, so next time it's George Washington's Rules of Civility, which I am looking forward to reading. I didn't know that he had such a thing. Oh my goodness. It's about 54. I don't know if that is an exhaustive list, but we will read 54 of them. I'm pretty sure it is. Okay, perfect. So, see you guys next time.